Hi, it's Greg Warner, and in this episode, we're going nuclear. Hi, it's Greg Warner, Vice President, Senior Investment Advisor at Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management and Gorner Wealth Management. Now, if you like my videos and like my content, please subscribe and hit that subscribe button. Now, today, I'm going to be joined by Canaccord Genuity Uranium Analyst, Katie Lachapelle. Hey, Katie, how are you?
Hey, Greg, I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. Now, sorry, I already butchered your name. Now, hey, you just have a great report out. You think that 2020 is the turning point for the uranium market. Now, why don't we walk a little bit about that and what made you think that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think 2020 just really highlighted how fragile and concentrated uranium supply is. So over the course of 2020, we saw a number of supply disruptions. So we saw Cameco shut down its Cigar Lake mine in Saskatchewan, and then we also saw Kazatomprom cancel its operations in Kazakhstan. So overall, two of the largest uranium production centers in the world were taken offline. And as a result of really these supply disruptions in 2020, we saw a reaction in spot prices. Spot prices rose to about $34 a pound in May. This is the highest level it's been since 2016. And then we saw primary mine supply fall to levels not seen since 2008. So why 2020 was a really important year is 2020 shifted into a deficit. And this is a deficit that we expect to sort of continue over the next few years unless we get higher prices to stimulate a restart of supply that's been taken offline or to incentivize new supply to come online. And then maybe lastly, another point for 2020 is I think 2020, we saw an increase in the likelihood of a return to long-term contracting. What happened was a number of things. We got clarity on a lot of trade policy issues. So Section 232, as well as the Nuclear Fuel Working Group, different amendments to the Russian Suspension Agreement, as well as the outcome of the U.S. elections. So I think the fundamentals in 2020 are dramatically different than what we saw maybe 24 months prior.
Well, why don't we just step back a little bit and talk about some of the drivers of the market, uranium. Who are the big users of it, and what countries are really kind of driving the demand for it to cause some of these shortages?
Yeah, of course. So if you look at the uranium market as a whole, obviously uranium is driven by demand for nuclear energy. The supply of uranium is quite highly concentrated, though. Supply is primarily in Kazakhstan, Canada, and Australia. And about 70% of the supply is actually concentrated in the hands of 5 primary producers. So you've got Kazatomprom, you've got Cameco. So Cameco is a commercial producer based out of Canada. They're in Saskatoon. Then you've got Kazatomprom, who is a state-owned Kazakh producer. Then you've also got Orano, Rosatom, CNNC, a couple other names that are largely state-owned mining companies. So with uranium production right now, 80% of this production is actually state-owned. So clearly, I think there's a clear imperative for diversification to increase security of supply within uranium, and some higher pricing signals will be required to actually achieve this.
Yeah, now with the new government elected in the States, a new president elected, do you see any movement on the U.S. side as far as uranium demand and the nuclear power sector?
No, for sure. And I think the United States, it's first important to highlight that they are one of the largest nuclear power countries currently. They supply about 20% of their electricity through nuclear. So they've always been quite relevant. They've had the most reactors, the most demand for uranium. We're starting to see a shift in this a bit now towards China, but the United States will remain relevant. And I think we have more of a constructive view on uranium recently with Biden coming into office. We've actually seen bipartisan support for nuclear. We also saw Biden officially rejoin the Paris Agreement just in early January. And he's openly expressed his support for nuclear as well. Just recently in the news as well, we also saw that the U.S. was potentially eyeing putting in some nuclear reactor tax credits. And we've also saw the U.S. Secretary say that, if I'm going to quote her, she basically said, we're not going to be able to achieve our climate change goals in the U.S. with our nuclear power plant shutting down. So we have to find ways to keep them operating. And we're starting to see that happen. And it's really increasing our confidence here at Canaccord in terms of plant closures in the U.S. and those potentially not happening. Just 2 days ago, we saw the state of Illinois announce actually that there was a verbal agreement in the works to actually keep the 11 reactors open in that state. So there's definitely some positive demand tailwinds in the U.S.
Okay. Now, outside of the United States, and I guess North America in general, on the Chinese side, what kind of demand are we seeing over there?
Yeah, so China will continue to be our key demand driver for uranium. Although nuclear power only represents about 5% of China's currently electricity consumption, they are going to be the biggest driver in terms of nuclear energy market going forward. It's this really growth from China and other non-OECD nations that is driving the positive demand outlook that we have. And our confidence in China's build out of nuclear power, I would say, has actually increased over the course of the last 12 months. In March, China recently released its 14th five-year plan. This plan was even more bullish for nuclear than we had previously anticipated. So they updated plan. It called for a 40% expansion in their nuclear capacity to about 70 gigawatts by 2025. And this, at the same time, they want about 50 gigawatts under construction. What this really means is that China's going to almost have a threefold increase in demand for uranium by 2030. So obviously that's a significant driver of demand and a key driver behind our positive supply and demand outlook.
Okay, so now where is the supply going to come from in your mind?
That's a good question. So right now, the problem with supply is that supply remains under a significant amount of pressure. What we've seen is a lot of producers curtail production. We saw Kazatomprom has reduced production by about 20%, and we saw Cameco also exercise supply discipline by taking down McArthur River, which represents about 13% of global supply, so obviously significant. And then we're also seeing reserve depletion. So we've seen some of the world's mines that have been producing for years. So the Ranger mine just shut down in January. The Cominac mine is also shutting down, or just shut down actually in April. And then just last year, we saw COVID-19 disruptions. And because spot prices have been so low for so long, we're really not seeing the incentive for these key developers to invest in new supply. So we've seen a period of underinvestment. The reality is that the current spot price does not stimulate restarts of mines such as McArthur River, nor is it sufficient to invest in new supply. So what we really need is we do need higher prices to actually get the supply to increase to meet our demand forecasts. I think that's something that's going to happen soon. It takes a while to build mines. Mines are expensive, and I think we're getting to that point now where utilities are recognizing that if they look 5 years out, the supply picture is looking a little bit scary.
So would that be the catalyst, you think, for moving the spot price up? Where, and how long would the spot price have to stay up for companies to start looking at, those are large capital intensive operations to bring back online, and typically, like in all resource extraction, there's a bit of a boom and bust cycle to it. Where do you, in your mind, where do you see the spot price having to be to make that tipping point, and for how long do you think?
Right. So I think right now, just for context, spot uranium is about $31 a pound. I would say that anywhere up to 50% of current production is actually underwater at these levels. What's protecting them is those higher price contracts that we just spoke about. However, those contracts are starting to expire. So the reality is that utilities are going to need to negotiate new higher price contracts. And I don't think uranium producers or even developers are going to accept prices that low because it's not economic. Just based on incentive work that we've done, it looks like those restart projects, if you're looking at Paladin's project, maybe Cameco's and McArthur River, it's going to need around $40 a pound at a minimum, probably more like $45 a pound. So I do think in the near term, over the course of the next 2, 3, 4 years, we will see a rise in prices to sort of that price level. And then if you look at other development projects, you have Arrow, you have Wheeler River. Yes, they're very tier one projects, but we're going to need even more pounds than that. So our long-term price, we run at about $60 a pound. I think we need a sustainable price increase for these mines to be able to produce economically and to actually produce uranium to fuel these nuclear reactors. Okay,
now why don't we talk about the elephant in the room? Because going back almost 10 years ago now, it was Fukushima and, Japan, shutting down, the reactors for a period of time and having a moratorium. How is that developing, and how is that affecting the marketplace now, and just the general sense and openness? I know we touched upon a little bit with the Biden administration. If you want to meet your green objectives, you're kind of stuck. You got to get the energy from somewhere. But let's just talk a little bit about the Japan situation.
Yeah, so if we take a look back at Fukushima, obviously in 2011, that was a tragic disaster. And what happened to the uranium market was governments decided to take a bunch of nuclear capacity offline, which obviously was a dramatic decrease to demand. And the problem at this time was at the same time you had an inflow of low-cost production coming out of Kazakhstan. So what happened with the uranium market was we went through a significant period of oversupply. Essentially, the last decade was tough for uranium. It was oversupplied. The spot price was extremely low. Producers were struggling to produce pounds. And the cost does remain still quite low from that period. But that oversupply has now changed. We're now getting into a more balanced market or even a supply deficit on our numbers specifically. And I think the outlook for nuclear is changing. Reactors are getting safer. And while the opportunity, or not the opportunity, but the potential for a black swan event will always exist, I think the benefits of having baseload, affordable, carbon-free nuclear power are starting to outweigh the risk of another potential disaster such as that. And governments are increasingly recognizing this. So with this happening, we're seeing increasing demand for reactor build-outs. There's currently about 53 that are under construction. And nuclear is continuing to be included in policies worldwide in terms of meeting our climate change goals. The reality is we're not going to be able to meet our climate change goals unless nuclear is somewhere in the picture.